Hey guys, welcome back to my Animal Adventures YouTube channel, and in this episode I want to cover the top 10 products that I use here in my snake room. And I have quite a few snakes. If you're thinking about picking up a ball python, or maybe you have a couple snakes, there are some essential products that I use quite a bit. They're really essential in my snake room here, and I'm going to cover those. I'm going to compare them to competing products, kind of show you the pros and cons, what each one looks like, and the advantages of using each. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a whole list of all the 10 products and put some links next to all the descriptions with links straight to Amazon, so you can go right to Amazon and actually buy those products. And I'm going to put it down in the description right underneath this video. And let's jump right into it, and I'm going to go through each of them one by one and tell you in depth why I use those products. Okay, so number one on my list would definitely be one of these snakes probe sexing kits. And actually you tell the male and female snake with one of these probe kits. And these actually have a whole bunch of different size probes. And typically for ball python hatchlings you use the smallest probe. And for your adults it really depends on the size of the snake. And the way you really use it is right at the base of the tail. There's actually a little pocket that you insert the probe into. And typically it's right here at the base of the tail. You take the probe and you put it in this little pocket from here, and it goes up into here. And if it goes really far up into the pocket, then it's a male. And if it only goes a real short distance, then it's a female. And I would say females are typically maybe it's kind of hard to see on the camera, but I'd say maybe like a quarter of an inch, when males will go probably almost maybe 3/4 of an inch up into that pocket in the tail. And another thing I like to buy is actually the personal lubricating jelly. I just kind of lube it up a little, and any kind of lubricant will really work, any kind of a water-based lubricant. And these probe kits are really inexpensive, and you definitely don't want to get to a point where you buy a snake and you find out later that Henry is actually Henrietta. It's actually a female instead of a male. And I would highly recommend, no matter where you bought your snakes from, you definitely want to get a probe kit. The probe kits are, I think I picked this one up for like $20. You can get them on Amazon, for even cheaper sometimes. And for the price, and I use this so much as a breeder, you wouldn't believe it. And it's really good insurance to figure out if your snakes are male or female. So number 2 on my list would definitely be some F10SC. This is a snake-safe disinfectant, and you really don't want to use anything besides this on your snakes. And this is I would say it's pretty expensive for a little bottle, but you really dilute it a long way with water. It goes a really long way, and I usually use probably this whole little thing right here. You can actually take the cap off and squeeze the bottle, and it fills up this little pocket right here. And then you can just dump out just this much. Or you can actually go in there with a little syringe, and that's what I do, is I actually exactly measure it out, and I use about 10 mils for a squirt bottle. And I actually have 2 different squirt bottles here. The green one is for my F10 for my snakes, and then for my rats I actually use a bleach, something a little bit more potent, but I really want to clean the rat tubs a lot better, so I use a bleach. You could probably use this on your rodents, but I think bleach is a little bit cheaper. And for reptiles, I would not recommend bleach. And the other thing I would say, number 3 on my list, is this Reptifogger. And the Reptifogger kind of goes hand in hand with the F10SC. So what you actually do, and what I use this for, is if I have a sick snake, and at one point Lucy had a really bad respiratory infection, and her mouth was so inflamed, it was like maybe a half an inch of just brown grayish goo in her mouth, and she was hissing and coughing, and the problem was we had her in the boa tub, and she just did not have enough room in the boa tub, and she kept pushing and pushing, and finally got her in the other enclosure. And it wasn't really husbandry, it was more of an enclosure problem. So if you have a snake with a respiratory infection, let me tell you, I was using this every day for a month, and she'd get a little bit better, and then I stopped using this, and then she'd get worse again. And it was really because it was an incorrect enclosure. But a lot of times if you keep ball pythons in too humid of an environment, you'll actually need this. And I've seen a lot of people, they'll get into respiratory infections and they won't have something like this, and they kind of order it as an emergency at the last minute. And what it does is actually you turn it on, and it actually just fogs the snake. And what you want to do is you want to put this right in the enclosure of the snake, and what it does is it actually vaporizes the antiseptic, and they breathe it in. And when they breathe that in, it's actually it actually cures the respiratory infection. And the thing I like about it is, since the snakes can breathe it in, it actually helps with respiratory infections. There's no chance of, you know, being poisoned by this. It's actually, I don't mind breathing in the F10, especially when I'm wiping down tubs, because I know that it's so non-toxic and that it actually helps the snakes if they breathe it in. So it's really peace of mind that I have an antiseptic that's safe for snakes, and especially if you come in contact with it, you don't have to worry about the toxicity of it. Okay, so for my product number 4, I would highly recommend using Pro Cocoa. This is the coconut husk, and it's actually the coconut husk chip. You can actually buy different forms of the coconut husk, and I like the chip versus the fiber or kind of the ground up like a peat kind of a coconut husk. And this works really well for my snakes, and I use it as the substrate for my ball pythons. And take a look at this beautiful pastel pinstripe bamboo. She's a stunner. And this is one of my hatchlings from last year, and she is very happy on this coconut husk. I've been using this for all my snakes, and what I do to water it down, I actually use this little, I bought this cute little watering can, and it actually just kind of sprinkles water right on the substrate. I even go right on the snake and everything, just kind of water it down and keep a little humidity on it, not too much. And what I started doing is actually putting a little spot in the back that's kind of free of the coconut husk, and this is actually right on the hot spot. So if she's just eating and wants to digest or wants to warm up, she can go back there and lay directly on the hot spot. And I just kind of keep one little spot open, and the rest is pretty much the substrate. And I found typically if a snake's going to go to the bathroom, they'll typically crawl away from the bare spot and actually come up here, go to the bathroom, and then go back, and it's really easy to spot clean. And I would say this is really an essential part of my operation. I go through a lot of this coconut husk bedding. Okay, so for my 5th product that is essential in my reptile room, I would say that is my laser infrared thermometer. And I don't know if you ever used one of these. They're not very expensive, and they're really nice to have. And it actually projects 2 little lasers, and it has an infrared sensor that actually detects the temperature between those spots. So up here in the cold side, it's actually in the 70s, and then in the back, I actually have a hot spot set to about 90 degrees. So you can kind of see the temperature of the snake is in the 80s, and the hot spot, you know, way in the back is in the 90s, and it's really helpful to know what the temperatures are in your enclosure, especially if you're using a heat pad. You want to know what the temperatures are as far as the substrate inside and what temperature the snake is. And especially if you're using an overhead lamp, you definitely don't want to overheat your snake. And I use this a lot, especially on my tortoise that sits under the heat lamp all day. You definitely don't want that tortoise to overheat. So for my product number 6, I would highly recommend the JumpStart Thermostat. This is about as cheap as you can get in a thermostat for the heat pad that goes on the hot side of your ball python enclosure. And the way they work, they actually have a little plug on the bottom where you plug in your heat pad, and then they have this little cord. On the end of the cord is the thermocouple that measures the temperature. And if the temperature gets too hot, this turns it off. And if it gets too cold, it turns it on. And there's a couple disadvantages. One is, I would say that the fluctuation between the high and the low is pretty high. So if you set it at 85, it'll probably go 2 to 3 degrees lower and 2 to 3 degrees higher between the heat cycles. So that's one thing you have to watch. So if you set it to 90, potentially it could get up to 92 or 93, which is something you really have to consider. And then the other thing is I actually tried to use these for space heaters in my reptile room, and it works for a little while, and then they burn out. And the problem is they're only rated for 800 watts, and my space heater is 1500 watts. And what happens is it actually fails on the on position, and what it does is this plug is always hot now. I actually use this just to kind of monitor the temperature in my room, because this is actually burned out. The heating will actually come on and off, but this is always hot because I burned it out with my space heater. So whatever you do, don't use them for space heaters. But for reptiles and the heat mats for the hot side of the ball python, they're a really cheap alternative. Alright, so I'm going to show you my product number 7 that's actually in use. It's up here on top of my hatchling rack, way up on top, and it's a higher end thermostat. This is actually the VE100. And the VE100, I'd say, is probably the best you can get for the money as far as a kind of a high-end with more functions. It actually has a night drop amount where you can actually drop the temperature at night and have a different temperature in the day. And a lot of people really drop the temperature at night during the breeding season, and I would say it has a lot better control of the temperature. You can see that it's typically spot on, usually within plus or minus 1 degree. It is a really accurate thermostat. And what I do is I actually have the probe down here in the middle of the rack, back on one of the hot spots way in the back, and it runs this whole rack, and I just plug all the things into this big, huge power strip, and it runs the whole rack. It's pretty awesome thermostat. Okay, so if you're like I am and you want to buy the best of the best of the best, and you never have to worry about replacing it ever again, you wanted some really high-end equipment for the remainder of your reptile career, I would highly recommend investing in the Herbstat 4. And actually I have 2 of them here, and each Herbstat 4 will actually control 4 levels, and look how tightly controlled that they control the temperature. And these are actually variable heats where they pulse the heat and get really exact temperatures. Look at how close they are. 90.1, 89.9, 89.7, really close, and the top one is 90.1. It's just really incredible. And what I do is I actually use them for my female breeders, and I put every level on a separate controller, and I really want to maintain the hotspot for my breeders because I want them all to produce. Alright, so these really high-end thermostats, these Herbstat 4s, they have one flaw, and that is if I came over here and accidentally hit the power and turned them off, the alarms would turn off as well. So what I actually have is I have these little magnetic temperature probes, and they're really cheap. It doesn't really control anything. It just measures the temperature. You can see this one's actually 90.1 degrees on the hot spot, and it has a high and a low alarm. So you can set the alarms, and if something goes wrong with this rack, you can actually hear that alarm go off. And let me tell you, when the power goes out in the house, these alarms on the Herbstat don't go out, but all these alarms all up and down here, they all start buzzing. You definitely need a separate alarm on a battery power to make sure that your hotspots are stable. So one last thing I would highly recommend getting, and that is a really nice snake hook. And you wouldn't think you'd use these, but actually I use it quite a bit. And remember, you don't really pick up a snake with the snake hook. And the good thing is if you open up a tub, and this one's actually, wow, this one actually looks like it's ovulating. I don't know if you've ever seen a snake ovulate, but typically right in here they're really thick. Wow, I didn't think it was that time to ovulate. Look at how thick it is in here. That's really interesting. I have an ovulating snake. So actually when a snake ovulates, what happens is this is the point where the eggs become fertile, and it really swells right in here. And really at this point, after ovulation, you don't really need to pair them up anymore because they're either fertile or they're not fertile. And this is really interesting. I didn't expect they'd actually ovulate this soon. Anyways, this is kind of a little distraction. But what I was actually thinking is that if the snake is really in aggressive feeding mode, what you really want to do is you want to come over with a snake hook and just kind of guide his head away, just to snap him out of the feeding mode. And that's typically the only time I really use a snake hook, is if I open it up and I want to pick up that snake and he's really aggressive in feeding mode. And you know, for pet snakes, they're typically never really in an aggressive, I want to bite you mode, other than I'm looking for the rat mode. So that's the only time I really use a snake hook. And really, I don't use them for ball pythons. I use them mostly for my reticulated pythons. But if you're new with ball pythons and you have some big ones and you're not real comfortable and you can kind of read them to where they're really aggressively looking for food, I would definitely use a snake hook to break them out of the feeding mode. Okay, so there you have it. Those are the top 10 essential pieces of equipment that I use here in my reptile room. And remember, the links to buy those, to purchase those products, are listed in the description underneath this video. So thanks for watching, and I will see you next time.